if I were to put forward a question of how far would you go to save your child? What would be the line that you would not cross? Rebirth is a 2023 movie about a doctor who performs an experimental treatment to bring a child back from the dead. However, to keep that child alive gets more and more complicated. Now, I want to talk a little bit about horror movies and how amazing this genre is. What I'm always so thankful for is how open and wide the broad strokes of horror movies can be. Let's take dramas, for instance. Now think about how narrow that genre is. Drama is such a recessive trait for that category. Like, unless the movie is just people in a room talking, drama always gets usurped by another tag. If there's action in it, it becomes an action movie. If there are jokes in it, it's a comedy. If it's a song, it's a musical. If it's suspense, thriller, all take priority over drama as a tag, because drama is inherently implied no matter what the movie is. Now, think about how expansive horror is and how it always rises above anything else. Action, still horror. Suspense, still horror. Thriller, I mean, it can be different, but still horror. Jokes, still horror. Singing, still horror. Ultimately, what I love about the genre so much is it gives the largest sandbox from which to play in. Like, you can almost do anything you want, provided that you build out your world and define it appropriately. Now that brings us to Rebirth. By all accounts, this movie should be a drama. Like, there's nothing scary in it outside of maybe a few creepy moments, but really, it's a morality play. It's putting characters in difficult situations where they have to decide between what's right and what they want. Now, it could have been anything, but because the subject is bringing a child back from the dead, once you get a bit on the fringe of what normal reality is and can do, and we dip our toes beyond our known reality, well, now it's categorized as a horror. So that said, I now get to review it, so I'm glad that it made the choices that it did. Now, this movie centers on two characters for pretty much the entire film. It's Rose and Celie. Their story starts off separately, but then eventually kind of merges together. Rose works in the morgue processing bodies that come through, and Celie is a nurse at that same hospital in the Bronx. However, they don't actually know each other at first. That is until Celie's young daughter contracts meningitis and suddenly dies. Now, when the child ends up in the morgue, Rose decides to take the dead child's body home for an experiment that she's been working on rebuilding dead tissue. This, of course, sends Celie into a complete frenzy, trying to find her missing daughter's dead body, and then eventually is able to track her down at Rose's apartment, where Rose reveals she is able to bring her daughter back to life. At that point, Celie decides to move in with Rose and help with the experiments in order to try and get her daughter back. Now, that may seem like there's some big plot reveals in what I just described, but, it's really not. Like, that's really just the setup of the movie, because the meat of this story lies in what happens after that. So Rose has been developing this experimental procedure for a while, but the problem is the cost of it is pretty high. What they need is fetal tissue in order to produce this particular serum needed for the treatment to have any effect. Now, as you can imagine, there are very limited ways to get fetal tissue, and that's where the heart of this story comes in. I won't go too far into the rest of the plot because there's really no need to spoil anything, and really the point of this movie is witnessing when there's something that we want so desperately that it's so easy to move those goalposts, so to speak, as to doing what is right and what is too far. Now, as I said earlier, this is not a straight-up horror movie, although technically this movie could be a prequel to every zombie movie or show in existence. But that's okay. Like, what makes this movie captivating are the characters' interactions and the choices and consequences that are being made. Now, front and center to that is the actors, who give an excellent performance here with distinctly different characters that are able to work together. Rose, played by the always great Marin Ireland, is pretty much on the spectrum in some capacity. She is emotionless doctor scientist with very little social interactions and even less tact or emotional intelligence. She is dedicated and not afraid to push the boundaries of science with a clear and justifies the means mentality. What also makes her compelling is how much she's willing to sacrifice her own health and body in order to prove out her experiments. I also really appreciated how unlikable that they made her. Like, this could have been written or played as a sympathetic doctor trying to do good. But they chose to keep this character really on the edges of society where she exists, which makes her a much more memorable and grounded character. Now, Celie, on the other hand, played by Judy Reyes, who I actually had never seen before. I don't know how that happened, but she gave an equally compelling performance. And she is on the other side of this, where she not only has the warmth and caring of a practicing nurse and mother, but also has the practical understanding of people and teamwork and the medical industry in general. So putting these two sort of odd couples together is where the movie really hits its stride, as the two both kind of complement and annoy each other as they try to work together for this particular common goal, even though they each kind of have different reasons for that goal. I will say my biggest issue is there's a little bit of clumsiness when it comes to how time is handled. Now, there's a little bit of a time jump from the moment Celie discovers the experiment with her daughter and then into the rest of the movie, which although I understand why you would jump in that scenario, it seems like they wanted to sort of spend more time on the procedure of what they were doing versus the discovery. But I found it a little bit jarring how they set up this very specific conflict of the two meeting and then almost immediately resolve that in order to get to better stuff deeper in the movie. You know, the movie checks in at just like an hour and 41 minutes. And so, I don't know, I would have appreciated maybe 5 or 6 minutes just to sort of resolve that a little bit and just dig into that a little bit more. Because by no means are you running into too much time for this type of thing. I mean, I'm a big fan of character stuff, so maybe that's understandable. But I kind of get what they're going for. I mean, it's not terrible, but I did find it a little off-putting and jarring. What shines here is the writing along with the very patient directing, camera work, and quiet moments of these characters. And it really makes this movie suck you into a world that it created and the task at hand. There's also some great special effects when it comes to just the gross anatomy work and the overall look and feel of it. But it all comes out fantastic. It's well-paced, it runs pretty smoothly with a solid ending reveal that I thought just hit very nicely. I'd give this movie a B+, but let me know what you think.